She went to a party up the road that night before. The next morning, her younger sister said, "Auntie, can you come out here, please?" And when I went out the back, I see my baby on the line. When I got her down and laid her on the ground, I could feel her skin so cold. I knew my baby was gone.
What was your daughter Linda like as a person?
She was very enthusiastic, happy-go-lucky. She just wanted to do anything and everything, to help her friends, help me. Yeah, loved going to school, playing sports.
What was life like growing up for Linda and yourself?
You're all right. She enjoyed school ever since she was little. Started at kindy all the way through.
Yeah. And when did things start to sort of go downhill in her life?
When I got kicked out through domestic violence out of my house, what I had for 9 years. I ended up getting my 3 younger ones taken off of me, and I ended up going to rehab to get them back.
And how did that impact on Linda?
It impacted her very big, and because she had to stay out here, she was too old to come into the rehab. She had to be out here on her own. Very sad for her.
What assistance have you got in the time since, in terms of support?
I had support from my sisters and from Megan and Gerry.
And what do you think could be done to save lives, to save young Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander lives?
For the younger ones to speak out on what they're going through. For their friends, instead of hiding everything, to let it all out and let a responsible adult know what's happening, and to have a lot more in the community where teenage children, Aboriginal kids can go to sit down and relax and everything after school, to hang out.
Grace's story is simply heartbreaking, but it's something we both felt was important to share. This deepening suicide crisis is not isolated, nor is it gender-specific. But up until now, it has mainly affected men.
4 Aboriginal girls have taken their own lives in a horror week in Western Australia.
The 12-year-old girl died in the town of South Headland on Sunday.
Over a 3.5-year period, 13 people under the age of 24 took their own lives. 5 were between 10 and 13 years old.
I've lost most of my family. I'm tired of talking to white people, asking white people for help.
In a horror summer which saw 5 young girls take their own lives in just 9 days, I was confused. Why this sudden surge in young girls suiciding? Adele Cox is the director of the National Indigenous Critical Response Service.
Look, it is a tragedy. It is a crisis that we have on our hands. And one of the things I think in terms of this space we haven't been prepared for is the emergence of, this trend that we are seeing very younger females now taking their lives, where historically, females have tended to self-harm as opposed to, to suicide and in their life. So I think one of the things that we're trying to, get a better sense of is how do we support our younger women and our younger females in communities across the country.
It is a national crisis and it requires urgent attention by everyone.
For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner June Oscar, the situation is simply devastating.
Anyone can be vulnerable at any time, anywhere. But there's something that's happened to these young girls that has led to them taking their own lives. We've got to understand what are those contributing elements that had affected these children in such a way that they thought and they acted to remove themselves from life.
So, what's driving this? What are the contributing factors? And what programs and services are available to assist those in need?
Look, every suicide is different, and I think that's what adds to the complexity of the issue. We know more broadly that there are issues around the social determinants that have a great impact on people's lives and therefore, their well-being. Things like education, employment, justice, health, housing, and the like. But I think for young people particularly, we've seen for a long time that struggle in terms of, the expectation that's placed on young people, the fact that there is at times a struggle for young people, particularly where there's strong cultural content to work, to walk in the two worlds. And I think, pressures from society in general and the fact that, in Australia, we're still having to, we still deal with issues such as racism and discrimination. That all has a huge impact on, contributing to, the higher rates of suicide that we are seeing in our communities.
What weight do you give to factors such as intergenerational trauma?
Look, intergenerational trauma certainly does have a big part to play. And, as a consultant for many years, I've had the opportunity to sit down and speak with, both members of the stolen generation, but also, broader Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities across this country where, people speak about the lived experience and the fact that they're still living with that trauma and the impact of, things like the stolen generation and past policies and legislation. A lot of these community members actually said that the biggest issue for them was not now healing for themselves, but in fact trying to get and garner support for their children and grandchildren. There's been that disconnect in terms of in many areas across the country. There's not been that continuation of law and culture and things like that. And so it was interesting that, when I'd asked the question of them in terms of saying, what will make your healing journey better? A lot of them responded and said, well, in fact, the healing journey for me is not the issue. It's the healing journey that, I need for my kids and my grandkids.
Moving forward, what are some strategies you'd like to see implemented?
I think the sector as a whole needs a shake-up. I think enough is enough of, different organisations, different programs, different services, worrying about its patch in terms of what it does and doesn't do. I think we need to come together and, I guess making the call as, one of the national Aboriginal bodies now, in this country, making a call out to services and organisations alike, black and, white, to actually come together, break down the silos, and let's do something with a united front.
Coordinator of the National Indigenous Critical Response Service, Gerry Georgatos, represents a different side of the argument on suicide response and is more straightforward in his assessment.
Poverty is the major issue. Poverty is the driving force of the disparity between First Nations and the suicide toll of First Nations to non-First Nations Australians. Let's understand the degradation of these communities. The degradation of these communities is not of their own making. It's by the making of one government after another, by deprivations, by neglect, by a lack of equivalency of services to those of non-Aboriginal communities. 8 out of 10 children living in the remote will not complete Year 12. 8 out of 10 children will not complete Year 12. I can tell you harrowing stories of how many children have taken their lives after their last game of football, after their last grand final, after their last match. I can tell you all sorts of stories of aberrant behaviour that have led to suicidal ideation and suicide of children with no hope on the horizon. Let's move away from the presumption that this is a complex issue. It is not complex. It is simple to address. If we actually argue that it is complex, we put it in the too hard basket and we let off our governments and government-funded institutions that could be doing something more about improving the life circumstance of people living that far below the poverty line, that they are in a state of helplessness and hopelessness, despair, disordered thinking, suicidal ideation, and many of them finishing up either in jail or taking their lives.
Suicide rates in remote communities are well known. But when accounting for population size, the majority of suicides actually occur in cities and towns. And as a result, different approaches are often needed.
I'm Belinda Duarte, Watchabalek Jajarang, the CEO of Culture is Life. What I'm most passionate about is seeing our communities thrive, our young people and children thrive, and I'm absolutely committed to ensuring that that happens. And one of the biggest things that we're confronted with our young people, and unfortunately our rates of suicide in our children is disproportionately higher than that of any other Australian, and internationally, we are in a position of shame around those statistics. So that's what Culture's Life is about, is actually addressing that and, making sure that our young people are thriving. Some examples of programs that you're asking about, they vary. We support a project that is in southern New South Wales by Uncle Max Harrison, a UN elder that takes young men out on country and takes them through practices of law, LORE, to support them in their sense of healing, their sense of place and cultural knowledge and the role that they play. And not only do they come from New South Wales, but different areas in Victoria that join Uncle Max. We've done work in the Northern Boy community, and unfortunately our elder up there has not been travelling well, but we continue to look at how we will support their work up there, which was shown to be, when the program activity is happening, that the statistics that were occurring around attempts or self-harm issues that were arising were actually reduced through that time where we had that program support.
Aboriginal-led organisations like Culture is Life are examples of the Indigenous community taking an active involvement in developing solutions to challenging issues. This is just one of the reasons why June Oscar says it's so important for government to work alongside community.
We have to demand our place at the table in designing any response. There should be the true and real observance of the right of Indigenous peoples to be part of any strategies, any initiatives that is about us. So, we hear and we say nothing about us without us. And if we continue to exclude Indigenous people from that space, we can expect to see much of the same. Because there's too many examples of where bureaucracies and policy designers who do not understand and appreciate the complexity of the environments and the challenges and the issues and the strengths that Indigenous people have to navigate this complex space.
What do you see as a solution to this issue? I know there's no one-size-fits-all solution, but do you have anything in mind that could assist?
I think we need to appreciate the diversities of our peoples and our communities and our lives, and what has worked, what hasn't worked, what we have designed to support ourselves and our families, and how we continue to build strong families and communities and individuals. We need to understand all of those elements that give rise to who we are as Indigenous people in this country.
There's no denying there are a number of factors that contribute to someone ending their own life, some of which many of us will simply never understand. One thing is clear though, the role of community in tackling this issue should never be dismissed.
You know, we need to move on from the rhetoric of acknowledging that self-determination is important and actually let Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people lead.
The National Indigenous Critical Response is reflective of the type of support it gives and does. And we have not lost at this time, after more than 2 years in operation, another member from those families. That's what keeps us going.
I would prefer that organisations like Cultures Life didn't exist, in the sense that we are in a healthy place in which parity is experienced. Actually, I'd love to see no suicide in this country.
It is hard, nothing prepares you, but every day I think we should all be, as adults, reassuring our precious little ones that they are precious, that we love them, that we are their protectors, and that we find the courage to act on those who are perpetrating the abuse and the dangers and creating the risks and the damage and the trauma to our children.